Oh. So we got it. Everybody can see?
You're good.
All right. So basically, what I wanted to talk about today, one of my biggest goals in education altogether, I'm passionate about providing tools and guidance for teachers, educators of all kinds, so that they can provide critical thinking within their students, for their students, to really participate, and not only just in the delivery of the content, but I think we can continue that process during the actual assessment time. And one of my favorite things to do, as Brian mentioned, I do game design as well. And one of my favorite things to do is use games as an assessment. And I'm not just talking about like sort of the quiz, the Quizlet and the, all the different little quiz things. Or, doing kind of quiz type things, or a Chutes and Ladders game where we just talk about, the facts and regurgitation of facts, and those are fine, but that's not really what this is about. This is about how do we take the content that the students have learned and synthesize it and put it together. So first, I'm going to give you a little bit about the why, but mostly I'm going to talk more about the how of using games as assessments. So, all right, so the first question, of course, is why games? What can we benefit from them? And so I'm just laid out a few ideas, and the first is that using a game as an assessment provides a comprehensive view of the student's understanding. So instead of just having them regurgitate facts or things that they might have crammed in or memorized and spit out the next day and might forget later, this actually shows us all the things that the students might learn from whatever that we are assessing for. And the other thing is that it gives students an opportunity, as I mentioned before, to exercise critical thinking skills. Why? Because they have to take the information that they've learned and actually make use of it, to actually synthesize it, to put it together in either, you'll see the different kinds of games that I'm going to talk about. The other thing is that it reinforces or furthers knowledge. And one of the reasons why is because in the playing of games, right, it reinforces the things that they've already learned. And also you'll see, we'll talk about the different ways that works. It also allows a range of intelligences to be expressed. So there's a lot of different ways that students can express what they know, but often if it's just a test or quiz in a traditional form, then they really don't get to allow us to see what they know through all the different ways that they shine in doing that. And the fifth thing is that it helps students create more meaningful connections. So we want them to make connections with the things that they're learning, that it's not just on a shelf somewhere, but really make meaningful connections. And so it's really wonderful to have this methodology. So now I want to tell you about, there's really kind of two kinds of what I call deeper learning games to use as assessment. And one, of course, is the teacher-created game. And a teacher-created game can really be used as a formative or as a summative assessment. And but for a student-created game, which is the other kind, and I love doing student-created games for assessments, it's really more about summative, because student-created games take a little bit more time than playing a student-created game. I mean, a teacher-created game. So first, I want to talk a little bit about the teacher-created games. What does that look like if you're a teacher out there and you want to see what this is like, or if you're an administrator and you want to help your teachers to think about this idea of what to do. So there's all kinds of things that a teacher can do. And again, it could be summative, like this right here. What you're seeing is I teach a methodology called lenses of questioning, and it's to help teachers ask a wider variety of kind of question, and more importantly, train their students to ask a wider variety of kind of question. And each kind of question is aligned with a different color lens. And you can see there's a little die there that has little colors on it. So what I do with my students, because we use this method quite a bit, I can do it as a formative exercise where they just roll a die and they have to, whatever color it's on, they have to ask that kind of question about the material that we're studying. Or that we've studied, and then others answer it and make a whole game out of it. But I can also do it as a summative assessment where the students write the questions, and I can see how much they understand the material by the questions that they write, because except for the orange lens questions, they're all open-ended and they're on deeper ideas. So in the play, and then we play a big game with it, and it makes an amazing summative assessment, and I can learn so much about what the students know, what they understand, what they're thinking about. The other thing that I love is to do game shows. You can probably tell by the way I'm talking, and I have my own podcast. I love to be a game show host. So this is a really fun methodology for me, but it's not about like doing Jeopardy where it's kind of a quiz showy thing. I like to really broaden the way the game shows go, and you can be very creative with what they entail. So one of the things, and just a quick example, is I'd love to do win, lose, or draw. If you want to do kind of if you have to do those skills-based things, like if you want them to just, or the knowledge-based things like vocabulary words. They teach English, so sometimes they have to do certain vocabulary, or concepts even, scientific concepts, whatever it is, to have them have to draw it out. If you know how to play, I assume most of you know how to play win, lose, or draw, where one person on the team has to draw and the other team has to figure out what they're talking about. So just little things like that can be super fun, but a way to see if your students really understand what's going on. I am not like my 15-year-old son. I do not create video games and computer games, but some teachers might out there. I don't know if any of you do. That's a great way. But there's also some that are out there besides just, again, doing like the Quizlet or the Kahoot or whatever. There are kind of more sophisticated games out there that you might be able to use if you yourself do not create them. You can create a board game. I love creating board games, and this is a great way when your students are playing a board game for you to really be able to see if they understand what the material is. And I love a good role-playing game. This one about the periodic table of elements, and a whole game based on this where the students get to take on roles. And of course, there's physical games too. It's wonderful for students to get to do some physical movement where they have to in order to understand the knowledge, or to show their knowledge, and they do that through a very physical means. So this is just a really quick example, because what I like to do is match the game with the content. So for instance, I was teaching in English an Agatha Christie novel, and then there were none. So it's all about mysteries. So the whole summative assessment on that unit was in the form of a clue game, like a sort of a live living clue game, where in order for the students to get the clues to see if you can see the somewhat psychic detective agency, and I give the students a role. So it's kind of a combination of role playing as these detectives, but also what they have to do to accomplish it. And through this, it was amazing. I could see which students really understood this book or not, and the whole concepts of how to write a mystery and so forth. Then there's the student created game. This is, to me, such a powerful tool for seeing if students understand the material. If they can create a game that completely expresses the idea, the knowledge, and the skills that you are trying to assess for. So here's just some ideas of different kinds of board games, and I'm going to get more specifically into those in just a minute. But I also want to show that in addition to board games, students can create card games. They can do simulation games, which I've had students create amazing simulation games, game shows, and also if you have students who can create a computer game, and there's a lot of kids out there that actually do this, it's a really nice way to assess. And it taps into also their talents and their passions, which I think is really important. Whether it's you as the educator creating the game or it's the students doing it, you want to consider what the themes, the big ideas, and the learning objectives are that the game is assessing for, and make sure to craft and design the game to be able to deliver that. When the students play this game, are we going to be able to see that they understand these? Did they get the learning objectives? So in a teacher-made game, the assessing actually comes in the playing of the game. But in a student-made game, the assessment actually comes from the designing and the creating of the game. So if that's where you will be able to see what's happening when the students make the game. So you want to be able to check in with them as they're doing the designing and the creation, so you can make sure to guide them on the right path, that they are actually going to be able, we will be able to assess to see if they understand it from their design and the creation of the game. And then the bonus, of course, for the student-made games particularly, is that when the other people in the class play each other's games, when everybody plays each other's games, it also reinforces everything that you are trying to teach. So it's a great way to just kind of reinforce as well as assess for the understanding. The other thing is sometimes it's not so much about the big pictures and the big ideas, but you actually just want to see if your students got the skills or they got the knowledge that you want to assess for. So for example, there might be like sort of bigger ideas that you want them to be able to do, skills like grappling with ethical questions, creating a persuasive argument, listening to and thinking critically about other people's arguments. And there are games that you could develop that will be able to test for that, or your students can show that they understand that skill. But sometimes your skills are very specific, like how to solve a quadratic equation. Now, I'm going to assume that Google was correct, that this actually is a quadratic equation, because I myself have no recollection of ever solving one, because high school is a really, really long time ago, and I'm not even sure I ever did it. But I will trust that that's what that is. Any math teachers out there, hopefully, you'll let me know. But the other thing is, like, if you're doing a foreign language and you need to see, do your students know how to conjugate verbs, or do they understand certain vocabulary? So that is another way to create it as a game instead of a quiz. And also the students can create the game to show that they understand how to do that. As I mentioned, I teach English, so Steps of a Hero's Journey. I have seen, this is like made for games. I have seen some of the most amazing games in doing the steps to a hero's journey. Some of them are simulation games, board games. I've seen physical, like obstacle course kind of games that students have created, and they're just mind-blowing. And it really shows me that they understand the idea. And the same thing can be done for the scientific method, for something, these are the knowledge things, right? The steps of hero journey, the scientific method, those are knowledge, versus the skills of like solving a quadratic equation, conjugating verbs, and things like that. So you can do both. And sometimes you want to kind of mix it up and do the whole thing. There's a lot of different things going in there that you want to assess for. And so a game is a great way to do that. For instance, in a chemistry game, you could do, you might want to assess for, do they know the properties of each element? Can they add and subtract electrons? Do they understand what reactions happen when you combine the various elements and why? So there's a great way to create a game, or have the students create a game to show that they understand all of those things and that they can do all of those things. So one of the things I would say, especially for the teachers out there, if you want to create a game, to find inspiration from different places. One is think about, what are the games that you like to play? I love Bananagrams and Candy Crush, and I have yet to create a game like that. But you can think about all the different kinds of games that you like to play. And then also ask students what their favorite games are. So as Brian mentioned, I have created many games that professionally, educational games. And so one of them I'll tell you about, but I was really inspired because every morning I would come in early and I would see students playing, obsessed with Magic the Gathering. I don't know if there's any Magic the Gathering players out there, and they would do other kinds of similar kind of games. And so I wanted to create this game. It's a kind of based on some philosophical ideas, called Feed Your Wolves. And I really patterned it after sort of seeing what my students were doing, seeing what they were excited about. And that made it a game that students were really excited to play. So the thing that you have to keep in mind if you're going to create a game, or when you have your students create a game, is that every part of the game is important. So for those of you who remember your English, there's the thesis statement, right? and then every single part of the essay has to feed into the thesis statement. Well, it's the same thing about the game. You figure out what are those important ideas, what are the learning goals, and every part of the game should feed into that. So that it also includes what the game pieces are. So for instance, that's in my game, but the kinds of tokens that are used, everything that's used in the game, how it works. And I really love this part, is that students, when they create their games, to make tokens that actually reflect what's happening in the game. I think that's super important. And really the most important thing is figure out what the game objective is, and it should completely relate to. And this is why it's beyond like just playing Jeopardy, right? The game itself, the object of the game is completely tied in to whatever the lesson is. So let me give you some examples. So for this one, this one's more an example of how the pieces all work. So you can see that in this game, which is about understanding about the Silk Road, these are social studies examples, but you can do this with any other subject. But you can see the cards themselves are shaped like a mountain because it takes place in the Himalaya mountains. And you can see that the tokens that the students made are camels, and that they relate to how people traveled the Silk Road. And the board itself is shaped in a certain way. It's created in a certain way to show that movement. It's not just done like chutes and ladders or something. And the questions and the tasks are not just comprehension test questions. They're more meaningful than that. In this case, you can see again the way the cards are, the form of money that's used, currency that's used, the way the board is laid out. They're all very specific. So I'm going to just show you a couple more specific examples, and then we can get into some questions and answers if you have. So in this one, this is another social studies game. And the goal of this game, obviously learning about Aztec, is to become emperor or earn 30 cocoa beans. So you can see that the goal is related to that time period. And also you can see the way the board is laid out, that it shows it's all about social levels. So the cards that student created, I can look at these cards and I can see that this student understands so much about that culture and the things that we learn. And this was a 7th grade student. And then you can see the currency, the cocoa beans. Now, if I were to go back in time and talk to the students, I might say, you know what, take actual cocoa beans or something that looks like cocoa beans to play with instead of the cards that just signify it. But either way, it was such a clever game, and the other students loved playing it. And when they played it, again, it reinforced everything that they were learning. And this one, I don't have the board still with me, but the different cards. And one of what I wanted to show is that the goal for this one, because it was all about warfare and so forth, is to try to win the war and get downstream before your opponents get there. So that the whole goal is related to what the students learn. And you can see that the currency in this case are sheep and donkeys. And you can see, and I really love this, that they made the tokens, and you can see them in the bottom there. They handmade the tokens, and they're all implements of war, because that is what this is about. So they don't just have, they show me that they really get it on like such a deeper level. So that's what I love. And that's really what I wanted to say. As Brian said, I give courses and workshops and coaching. You can find me at batsheva@newlensed.com. And I have a great podcast called Overthrowing Education. It is a lot of fun and also very inspiring. And there's lots of surprises in there every episode. That's a lot of fun, commercial parodies and of course game shows. I have a game show that I play with my guests after every interview. And that's what I got for you.
Great stuff, Batsheva. Really appreciate it. And a very interesting contrast in some ways to some of the things that we're hearing this morning. I want to run one of our quick polls, and this one's kind of about feasibility for some of the ideas that you talked about. I'm just curious if folks could chime in on where they sit in their organizations and sort of how this game-based approach might work for them. So we'll let that one run for a few seconds, not a few minutes. In the meantime, I'll actually post a question of my own, which is also sort of a feasibility question, but you're very focused on the classroom level, I think. Listen to your presentation. I'm just curious, and maybe this is a loaded question, but do you see game-based assessments taking hold at state and national level assessments? And if so, how do you think that could play out?
I would love for that to happen. I would love to see that happen. I'm not sure. I would have to really think about how it could happen. I mean, I feel like it would be in the in the technology range, but I'm not as interested in things like gamification that is all about badges and levels and stuff like that. So for me, it's only slightly better than giving grades and points. It's just like a little bit more exciting. And so I'm not sure how that would play out, but I think it would be an amazing thing to think about and to design something that could work school-wide, district-wide, nationwide, whatever, some kind of, it would be such an amazing assessment to create that the students playing this game, you could see where their skills are, their knowledge, and where they're at. I think that'd be amazing. If anybody out there wants to create it with me, I'll be happy to assist. But I think that's the only way that it would really work is using technology. I'm not really sure how else.
Well, your answer, I think, is interesting in reflecting on the poll results, because there's this almost half of the audience are interested in it, and they think it's possibly feasible, but we'd have to figure it out. So it seems like that, how do we translate not only into organizations, but maybe on a larger scale, some of the principles that you're suggesting for these games. And you mentioned gamification, and so and you mentioned not being a big fan of gamification, and what you're really talking about is games for game's sake, as opposed to gamifying other activities. It sounds
right, and it depends on what the gamification is, because there's really two. When people say gamification, there's two things. There's the part that I love, which is taking the engine of gameplay, like what I was talking about with my with the die and the lenses of questioning and so forth. Like, that's an engine that I use. I use a die, or I might use some kind of something that I use that is the engine of gameplay. It's not a game necessarily in and of itself. I might have a spinner. I might have a something that's a fun way to do something. That's one kind of gamification. But the kind that most people are thinking about, first of all, it usually involves technology, which I don't think it always has to do. I think there's something lovely about tangible. But in this time of remote learning, a lot of times I've been able to transfer a lot of what I do using technology, which is really great. But one of the things that people get stuck on a lot of the times is that gamification means that the students do whatever their work they're doing, and then they level up to, earning a badge if they get this right, or earning, or moving up to the next level, or then they become sorcerers, and then they become wizards or whatever. But they're not really doing that. It's just another way of saying, you get a B, or you get an A, or you get 20 points, you get 30 points. So it's nicer than those things, but it doesn't have the depth that I'm looking for.
We've got a question in the Q&A. Your talk mainly focused, it looked like, on K-12, essentially.